Hey everyone, I just watched an incredible movie about Harriet Tubman and her role in the Underground Railroad and how she freed the slaves. I just did an amazing podcast on it. Be sure to listen to it right now. So I had the opportunity to watch the movie Harriet that just came out recently about Harriet Tubman, and then I was really intrigued by a lot of what I was seeing in this movie, and I went and did some my own personal research on the movie, just like fact check, to see how true to the historical documentation is the movie. And I'm just going to preface this podcast by saying, number one, I am not an expert in Black history. Number two, I'm not an expert in slavery. I'm not an expert in anything that has to do with African American heritage or culture. The reason that I'm choosing to talk about this is because there were some things in the movie and some things about Harriet, the human nature that really intrigued me. And then when I actually did some fact checking on this, I became even more intrigued by this. So I'm going to start off by just kind of telling you a personal story that was very interesting and quite life-changing for me, and then bring into what it was about this movie that intrigued me. And again, I feel like I'm making excuses for this here, which actually sounds ridiculous, but it's my honest attempt not to offend anybody when it comes to African American culture in this podcast, because I don't want to make light of anything, which I don't think that I am. But I don't want it to seem that way because I'm not actually discussing the horrors of slavery and whatnot, which I completely agree with and everything. Like it was a terrible time in our history. So anyway, so I have this experience many years ago where I'm out there and really kind of striving for my own success, and I'm starting to get somewhere. I'm starting to get a little bit of traction. And I become stuck over a period of time for probably about 12 months. And I've told this story in other podcasts. I've told it in seminars. And basically the story goes like this. I was building a company. I was stuck for a period of time. There was a gentleman that I was following his teachings, and I was really following everything that he said to do, and for the most part, I was having success. But again, I got stuck. So I thought, well, I'm going to go find this guy. He's speaking somewhere. I'm going to go talk to him and see if he can figure out what the hell my problem is, so that I can get unstuck. And make a long story short, I meet him and I tell him exactly what's going on. Tell him that I'm stuck, and he looks me right in the eye and he says, "Your problem is you don't want it bad enough." And he turned around and walked away from me. And I remember getting very angry. I was hurt. I was jaded. I was thinking to myself that all of this teaching that people do around success was a scam. Now, I'm going back a long time. This is probably, at the point that I'm doing this podcast, I'm probably going back like 25 years at this point. So I didn't feel good about it, but on the way home from the conference, I remember thinking to myself, after I came down a few notches in my anger, I remember thinking to myself, what if he's right? Like, let's just assume maybe for a moment that he's right and I'm not seeing something, and I've got a blind spot here. Where would this show up in my life? And where it showed up, where I realized that it showed up, was that everything that situationally suggested to me a place to stop, like, I don't know, whether I got rejection in a sale, or if I was speaking to a group of people and didn't go over well, or whatever. I was agreeing with the situation. I was agreeing with the challenges of the result, and I would stop at that place, and I wouldn't go any further. So number one, I was not developing a skill set to learn how to break through somebody else's objection. I was basically only looking for people that could see what I could see and would say yes to it, not having not understanding that I need to develop the skill of influence. I need to learn to be able to influence people. And when I say influence, I'm talking about people who they want a result, they want the same result, but they don't know how to get there in their head. And because they don't know how to get there in their head, they can't get there in their action. And even if they do get there in their action, usually they end up turning around. So this is where this movie comes in. So I'm watching Harriet, right? And I love history. I love to study history, and I'm always looking to see, whenever they create a movie about something that's fantastic in history, I always go back and fact check it. Like, how much of this is true? Where did they take artistic liberty in the movie? Because the artistic liberty is one thing, but sometimes the facts themselves are just so astounding that it leaves you with this incredible inspiration of what, one or several determined human beings could actually do. And here we have this woman who is a slave. Her mother was promised by the father of the slave owner that when she turned 45, that she would be set free, and that I guess her children or whatever would be set free. So I did some fact checking on that, and apparently that's not true. What was true in this gentleman's will was that the mother would be set free at 45, and then the kids would be set free when they turned 45. So I'm just telling you, that's what I looked up on the internet. That's what it said on the fact checker boards that I was checking out. So anyway, Harriet decides that, enough is enough, and she's going to take matter in her own hands, and she's going to take off. And in the movie, it shows her basically ditching her husband and taking off by herself and then getting to Philadelphia. Well, apparently that's not true either. She took off with two brothers. But here's the rub. At some point in the journey, according to what the historical fact-checking thing said, they actually the two brothers got scared, and they turned around and went back. So I'm continuing to read this. Now, the movie was amazing enough in itself that this woman had a deep enough sense of purpose. She literally believed that she was being led by God to get herself free and then go back and free all these people. And according to history, she freed about 70 slaves herself, and then there were a few hundred that she freed in the Civil War with the help of a bunch of other people. But through the system of the Underground Railroad and the people that she met, she was able to free about 70 slaves. And the movie portrays that, doing it once and making it from Maryland to Philadelphia, she got lucky. And they kind of portrayed like, you're crazy if you try to go back and do this again. Like, you're going to get caught. They're going to tar and feather you. They're going to kill you. They're going to rape you. They're going to make you go through the most horrific pain imaginable before they kill you. And she goes back anyway, and she does it again, and then she does it again, and she does it again. And with this idea that this is her purpose. And in the one time she goes back, after she's gone for a year, she finds out that her husband, because she hadn't come back in a year, he married somebody else, and that woman got pregnant, and she was going to have a baby, so she loses her husband. And so I'm watching this, and I'm thinking to myself, this is so fascinating, because you could not, if you were doing a seminar on success, or you were writing a book on success, you could not write the steps any more accurately than the way that they portrayed this story in the movie. It's like textbook for a person that wants to become successful in their life, and they want to be free themselves of their own bondage, whatever it might be. And make no mistake about it, every one of us is born into the bondage of the thinking that came before us. And again, I am not comparing white folks in any way to what black slaves went through. So I'm just making that perfectly clear, putting that out there. But throughout history, this is a common thing. We're passed information down from one generation to another That information either worked or didn't work. It came out of either inspiration or it came out of fear. And for most people, it keeps us locked into a way of doing things where it keeps getting us the same old, same old, same old all the time. So the idea is that every generation wants to break free to another level. But what's fascinating about it is this whole idea of, do you want it bad enough? So as I'm doing this research on her, I come across this story because for those of you that see the movie, if you remember, the woman that was training her on how to present herself to go back south as a free woman. So she was pretending to be a free woman. They gave her false documentation. And she also gave her a gun, and she's like, you may need to use this. You may need to use this gun. Well, here's what the documentation said that I came across, was that actually the people that she pulled the gun on the most was the people that she was actually trying to save. And I had to go back and read that again. I'm like, what the hell is this? Turns out that almost every one of these individuals that she's trying to save at some point in the journey gets scared and they want to go back. And she literally has to pull a gun on them and say, you're either going to live free or you're going to die. You ain't going back, because if they were to turn around and go back, they would get caught, and then they would end up finding everybody else. So their fear, the people that wanted to go back, their fear literally was putting everybody else in jeopardy. And I thought to myself, I realized that it's a completely different situation with a lot of different meaning to it, a completely different time in history. But the truth about this is that the same kind of fear comes over each one of us whenever we are going to do something that we're afraid to do, that we're not certain of the outcome. And there's something that causes us to want to turn around and go back. And Harriet took this to a completely different level than most people did. I often thought to myself, and even back when I was in high school, when we studied this, when we were going through school as kids, the courage of the people that ran the Underground Railroad, you can't imagine, because if you live in a free world today, you're not really running up against all of that much situation where, if you make a small mistake, you could be killed. And I do realize, though, that African Americans still face that when it comes to the police and when it comes to, different parts of the country and other races also in different parts of the world. But the average person that's living an average life never really sees anything like that. So the desire to break free, that's inherent in every single one of us, really can't be measured against what somebody else did or the reasons that they did it for. Because we can never, we can study somebody else's experience, we can empathize with somebody else's experience, we can attempt to intellectually understand their experience, we can agree from a value or ethical proposition whether something was right or wrong, but we can't know what somebody else actually went through. Because the whole idea of self-improvement, the whole idea of you stepping into your greatness, every individual on the planet stepping into their purpose, really requires the overcoming of their own demon. And that's the demon that's inside of us that wants us to turn around. So we get an inspiration, we get an idea, we have a desire to do something, we step out, and something pulls us back and wants us to turn around. And in this situation, the turning around meant almost certain death for everybody involved. Number one, if they had not gotten back to the plantation where the slave masters were residing and where they were residing before those people woke up or realized they were gone, they probably would have been killed or extremely disfigured for even attempting to leave at all. In many of these cases, they were being chased. Like people were actually looking for them because they had escaped. And going back would have just revealed their position. It would have also revealed how Harriet was actually getting them out. Like what routes was she using? How was she dodging, the dogs and really good trackers, that type of thing. But what I find amazing about this is that the thing about Harriet that's really, really impressive was here was a person who accepted her God-given purpose in life and was determined to fulfill it no matter what hardship she faced. And there were a lot of hardships that she faced. Not only, she faced hardships all the way from when she was a little girl to an adult. The woman lived to be 91 years old, which is a pretty extraordinary feat back in the mid-1800s to begin with. However, I think, and I don't just think this, I know this, every single person has something inside of them that if they would acknowledge it, has the same direction for their life, the same type of purpose. And look, Harriet's purpose was magnificent. Like we have the history to go back and look and say, look at what this brave woman did. Look at what she faced. Look at how she wanted to break the back of slavery and get as many people free as she possibly could. Here's the question. What is it that causes a person to either accept that calling in their life, whatever your individual calling is, or reject that calling? Now, if you haven't seen the movie, I would suggest you go see it. I would also suggest that you do the fact checking on Google or whatever. I have not read any historical literature on this more than just thumbing through a few things. But like I said, I really don't have any education in this area at all. I'm coming just from the place of her purpose and what she did and what she was willing to do to actually make this work. So I want you to think about this for a second. Today, we really do not, how do I want to put this? We look down on any person that would have that much strength to literally tell the people that she's helping, either you continue to come with me or I'm going to shoot you, right? Now, let's mellow that slightly, okay? I'm a business coach, a personal coach. I help people go through extraordinarily tough times in their life, come out the other side and win. Every day I face people that are afraid, and I have to stand in a place where I'm helping them overcome that fear. And the fear that they're overcoming is nothing compared to what these people went through in slave years. But like I said before, number one, I would never compare it. That would be completely inappropriate. Number two, you can't compare it. You can't compare it to anybody else's fear because every person's fear is unique and individual to themselves, right? Like we all have experiences and things in our own experience in life, in our own childhood, in the things that we've done or the things that we didn't do or the imagination that we created around things that cause us to be afraid of certain things. And part of our reaching out to fulfill our purpose is to be able to overcome those fears and then become stronger as a person to continue to move in the direction that we're going in. I have also been criticized over the years by me telling people, if you don't do it my way, I'm not working with you. If you don't do it my way, I'm going to fire you as a client. My way is the only way if you're working with me. Now, my way is not the only way to get there, but if you're working with me, it's the only way to get there. And the reason is that There may be many different ways to get there. Like Harriet may have had, there may have been many different people throughout history that could have taken these people to freedom. But these people were with her. She went back. They agreed to go. They started to go. They went to turn around. She pulled a gun on him and said, listen, you either come with me or I'm going to shoot you right here because you're not going to get us all killed because you're afraid. They're on this journey and the fear is coming in and they want to stop. Ask yourself this question. Watch the movie. Ask yourself, which person are you showing up as with this kind of a representation of courage and this kind of a representation of purpose in life? Are you following someone who is leading you to freedom? Are you willing to follow the person to lead you to freedom? Or are you the person like Harriet where you can identify that calling inside of yourself and actually lead others to freedom? Because you got to remember, she led herself first. To my understanding, the two brothers that she took off with, they turned around and went back. I don't know what happened to them. I wasn't able to find that in time for me to do the podcast. I don't know. I'm not sure what happened to them. But she didn't let that stop her. So they got afraid. They turned around and went back. She said, no, she's going to continue to go. And she did that on foot. She went all the way from somewhere in Maryland to Philadelphia on foot. She did that. And she did it in the middle of the night. And she did it with hardly any food and facing all different kinds of adversity to be able to do it. She led herself. She did not let the fear overcome her. And there's an interesting scene in this movie. She goes to, her father tells her to go see the Reverend, and so that the Reverend will pray over her journey for a safe journey. And the Reverend tells her, fear is your enemy. Fear is your enemy. And to listen to God, and that fear is your enemy. And I think that is such a message for all of us, because there are so many different ways that fear will show up. And I think that part of her journey was also to have this experience of all these different ways that fear showed up. If you watch the movie, you see first she has to overcome her fear. Then she has to overcome the fear of the people around her that she's trying to convince to go with her. They don't end up going. She gets there. They don't want her to go back. So the people that are running the Underground Railroad in Philadelphia, they don't want her to go back. They think it's crazy for her to try to actually go back on her own to get other people. She has to overcome their fear. She has to overcome her fear of actually going back and trying to sneak through to be able to try to find her husband. And apparently her husband wasn't the first one that she went back for either. I think she went back for a sister or a couple of cousins or something. But then she ended up going back for her husband. She had to overcome the fear and the tremendous loss of her husband basically giving up on her and going to find another woman and marry another free woman and then have a baby with her and completely leave her. And it leaves you with the question of why. Because if you watch the movie, you might think to yourself, okay, slavery is a big enough purpose, freedom is a big enough purpose to do this. That's the context in which this story is told. But if you look at the context in which with every human story is told, it's the same story as far as freedom goes. And the idea is that you have to want it bad enough. Harriet wanted it bad enough to be able to do whatever it took to get there. She had no idea what she was going to have to face or how she was going to react to it or what was going to happen along that journey. She had to make decisions as she went. She had to lead herself. She had to control her fear. She had to follow what God was telling her to do in her life, and then go back and follow what God told her to do with everybody else, regardless of her fear. She was adamant about not letting somebody else's fear or limitation get in her mind over the idea of what they thought was possible for her to do. She would not let it in. She knew that if God told her to do this, that it was absolutely possible for her to do it. And that was the only voice that she listened to. So I know that when we listen to that voice on the inside, it is giving us a direction to go out and meet with all of the opportunities, with all of the resources, with all of the people, with all of the things that we need to put the pieces together to allow us to accomplish the great things that we're accomplishing in life. And let's put our own individual's success aside for 1 second and talk about the world just for a moment. Because the problems that the world is facing are deeply rooted in fear. They're deeply rooted in fear. Fear gets human beings to accept a lie. And there's many lies, but the lies basically tell us what we can't do. The lies tell us that there's not enough. The lies tell us that we have to be dependent upon certain things that leave us vulnerable to being manipulated by other individuals. It's all rooted from the fear. It's like there's many people that know if I can stir up enough fear in a group of individuals, I can manipulate them into basically doing anything. Fear, they say, fear is the devil. Like, fear's the enemy. You cannot follow fear. The other thing is that God doesn't speak through fear. Spirit, the universe, it doesn't speak through fear. Lies speak through fear. If you go into religion, like if you go into Christian religion, like Satan's called the great liar, right? I think metaphorically, that is the whole idea of the lie itself, which is the lie is going to tell you not to do the thing to get to freedom. So I don't know why she chose to follow God other than she knew it was real. She knew that living the way that she was living and watching her people live the way that they were living was not really living. It was just existing. And we have our own way of existing in the world today that's just existing. The propaganda that's going on around our world right now about so many different lies and how bad the world is. I think like we live in one of the greatest times in history. The knowledge that we have, the awareness that we have, the technology that we have, the potential that we have to do great things is fantastic. But we also have a bigger problem, and that is the lies that are being told that keep people from stepping into that greatness to go out and continue to make the changes that people like Harriet Tubman started off by changing. I mean, what a great woman with internal strength and an inner knowing to follow that. Don't think for a moment when you watch this movie that you don't have that in you. You do have it in you. In fact, I have always said that whenever we watch a movie like this, or we read a book, or we read a story, or we read something like this, where it's basically giving us a story of the hero's journey, and it stirs that inspiration and emotion inside of us, that is verification that exists in us as individuals, as people, to go out and live an amazing life. And yes, you may have to be very serious with any person that is telling you that you can't. And when it comes to business, think about the scenario of all the people that wanted to go with Harriet. They bought into the dream. They wanted to be free, but they were full of fear. They needed a leader to help them cross that finish line. And in her mind, it was, we either live free or we die. If we would start to take our life that serious, we would see a hell of a lot more change. And for those of you that are that are really going after individual goals in your own life, creating your own life the way that you want it to be, you need to take it that serious. You really need to take it that serious, because you are literally giving up your life for whatever it is that you choose to do every day. Let Harriet Tubman and people like her and the inspiration that they created be an inspiration to all of us of what it's like to live free. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this video, I would love for you to like it, number one, and I would really love to hear your comments on this. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you thought about the content. If you watch the movie, tell me what you think about the movie, and don't forget to subscribe. We'll talk to you soon.